Sidelines with Rob Browne. Talk sporty to me.
Sorry about that. Doug Dean with us. Yeah. Have you heard anything I said in that first segment?
Not one damn thing.
Holy shnikes. Well, I'll tell you one thing. For those people that are lip readers, that first 3 minutes was really good, wasn't it, Doug?
Yeah, I thought maybe I needed to see my audiologist.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm fantastic.
The college football world, we've been talking the last couple of days about it, and it's really not much more to say about conference realignment and everything. Everybody's trying to find a chair, but are they trying to find a chair on the Titanic, or are they smart enough to get a rowboat and get the hell out of there? Your thoughts?
Oh, it's crazy. But before we dive into that, because it's what is today, the 9th of August, Rob, the year
Yes.
Let's call it mid-August, because that feels better about getting college football back in our world sooner, not later. But this time of year, I think I've shared this once before on your show, Rob, the same month. I love to dust off an old quote from our story from Joffrey Norman. And it's from an obscure article he titled Roger Clemens and the Truth. And if you'll bear with me for a second, this is really a little bit of a hat tip to my good Bama friends, but the sentiment in Norman's story applies to us all who are SEC or college, especially college football fans in the South. In Montgomery, Alabama, a few years back, I was sipping some iced tea. I'm sure it was sweet tea, by the way, and talking to a newspaper reporter. In his youth, when life was sweeter, he had written about sports, and his best memories were his interviews he had done with Bear Bryant. A goal line stand against Tennessee is so much cleaner and more satisfying to write about than a highway bill, Rob. We were supposed to be talking politics, but we couldn't help ourselves. It was hot. It is always hot in the Black Belt in Alabama in the middle of August, and it feels like it'll be hot for all eternity. So we talked sports for some relief. And here's the quote, Rob. You know, the man said wearily, I just can't wait until they kick it off again. I mean, I feel like if I can just make it for another 2 to 3 weeks, then they'll be playing football again, and then everything will be okay. Is that great, Rob?
I love it. I love it. And I think about just who wrote that? Joffrey Norman.
Joffrey Norman. I'll send you the link. It's kind of hard to find out there, but it's from an article he wrote, Roger Clemens and the Truth. And that just, to me, we do feel like, man, we're just going to die if we don't get to college football. And I doubt you feel quite that same passion in some other regions of the country, especially out on the West Coast, where they were called the Conference of Champions. Pac-12, 553 NCAA championships, Rob, over 108 years, and they got shanked, gutted, and quartered by the Big Ten and Big 12. It's just shocking, isn't it?
It is. And I mean, I like, and you know, and we all know the late night games of the Pac-12 basketball when Bill Walton's on there. He is fun to watch. The Conference of Champions, but he'll be talking about, let's say he'd go, Doug Dean, the point guard for Arizona, went to his home yesterday afternoon. He plays piano. He's a big fan of Mozart and Chopin. And the family studies and reads literature, Chaucer, Thoreau. On Walden's Pond, they have a room in the house decorated like the cabin of Walden's Pond. Very simple life. But there he goes again for a three-pointer. He's a great shooter. We're going to miss that. I mean, well, he'll still be there.
Yeah. Well, there's just so many aspects. I'm not going to spend inordinate time on the now deceased Pac-12. It is fascinating. Where did Cal and Stanford go? Mountain West, get this, Rob. If they end up just saying, all right, we got to play some kind of football, Mountain West, guess what those teams get paid a year? $4 million a year is their TV deal. That's how you become irrelevant in a hurry. So it's kind of sad, especially in the case of Stanford, because they've played some good football. Even Cal, there have been years they played football. But, it's all about leadership. And I'm not the biggest Greg Sankey fan, but I would be the first to say he has shown brilliant and visionary leadership. Above all, understanding the threats and opportunities. The SWOT analysis, Rob.
Yeah.
And there have been threats and opportunities the last 10 years. And if you put your head in the sand like the Pac-12 commissioner did, George Kliavkoff, however you pronounce it. And you say, well, surely we're so valuable. After all, we're the West Coast. We're the Pac-12. We're the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl. We can get we can get as good a TV deal as the Big Ten. Wrong. So his hubris, arrogance, and glacially slow pace did him in. And farewell, Conference of Champions. But life goes on. I'd look forward. You can comment on that if you want, but look forward to getting quickly into SEC ball.
Yeah, there's nothing else I need to say because you just said it, and it's right. And I love football. I love sports. want to see them good all over the country. You go to an area where the sports are good, it's just everybody, rising tide floats all boats. And we don't need a void, but they're their own worst enemy on the West Coast. I mean, Larry Scott, and then Boris Karloff comes in there, Kliavkoff. Stupid is as stupid does. They have no one to blame but themselves. Okay. Let's head back down on the plains of Auburn.
Yeah.
Some things have been happening. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, recruiting. KJ Bolden, he commits to Florida State, but he's still going to take an official visit to Auburn, Doug.
Last I heard, yeah.
So I told Audrey last night, we were out finishing up a hike before we ran, and I said, that's kind of like I'm engaged, but my girlfriend told me she's still going to date other people till we get married. And I've said that always, but you agree with me?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, some of now because of the December early signing period, which I think most of the coaches are not crazy about, because that you're still playing football. Some teams at that point, you're vying to be bowl eligible. Some couple of teams are trying to win a berth into the playoffs. So it's not the best timing. But now Rob, 70-80% of the signees go ahead and make that official with ink on paper in December, not later in February. I remember some of us used to be tempted to take off work on the first Wednesday in February to watch all the commitments pour in. And so now these kids, when they schedule their big announcement and they put one of 3 or 4 ball caps on announcing their school, that's a commitment. It doesn't have any binding authority. But I haven't looked, but my just going by feel, I think 80 or 90% of kids end up sticking with that original big announcement because they've gone through a lot to get to that point. So you'd rather be a school that they've committed to, not one that's still trying to get a visit, trying to flip them. It's easier to keep a commitment. You agree, Rob, than it is to flip a solid commitment. But it does. The flips do happen. And KJ Bolden really loved his time at Big Cat Weekend to the point he loves his coaching staff. That for example, if there's some kind of hard times that befall Florida State, of course, the same could easily happen to Auburn instead with our schedule. But if word of what's going to happen with Florida State, the demise of the ACC, starts to make it look like, wow, I'm not going to be playing on the biggest stage if I go to Tallahassee necessarily. Do I really want to go there? Then Auburn would be probably the best team in position, maybe Georgia as well, to flip that commitment. But regardless, now I was talking to Jeffrey Lee of On3 Live. He's one of the better recruiting gurus. And Auburn is in big time on Zaquan Patterson, who's also a 5-star safety out of Chaminade in Hollywood, Florida. So, and look, this week, Rob, the next week or so, I'm going to give you 3 names. TJ Lindsey, big-time defensive lineman. Cam Franklin out of Mississippi, who is, if not a 5-star, should be, that Auburn is in great position for. And then of all places, Santa Ana, California, Mater Dei, and if you know the translation of that, Rob, Mother of God, if DeAndre Carter, the big offensive lineman, rivals 100 O lineman, commits to Auburn, I will be saying Mother of God.
Yeah, that would be huge. But again, that's what's wrong with the Pac-12. This mass exodus, the reverse of the grapes of wrath. And it didn't just start this year, but that is going to be exacerbated by the demise of the Pac-12. I mean, and so do you think anybody that's continuing to recruit KJ Bolden, namely Georgia, Alabama, and Auburn, might tell him, why do you want to go to Florida State? That conference has got one foot in the grave. I mean, you don't think anybody will say that, do you?
No, there's no such. We're too classy, aren't we, Rob? Kirby Smart would never negatively recruit.
Never.
Now, the head coach, and now he was the best at it when he was at Alabama. And to be fair, that was his job. Recruit.
That's right.
illicit or illegal. Of course, some of that happened at almost every school too, if we're honest. The dark gray areas of recruiting. You sort of chuckle when you hear this whining about money and NIL is going to kill football. Are you kidding me? You don't think we had money flowing through hands and back channels, whether it's through a guardian, a parent, or the player himself, and tangible cash and non-cash benefits?
Yeah.
It's not new. It's just out in the open now. So let's get on with actual football. I was going to footnote, Rob, because I know the Auburn contingent, really any fans would have been, it would have raised an eyebrow in a good way if you're an Auburn man or woman. But yesterday at practice, the most significant thing was looking across the photos and seeing number 27 running back Jarquez Hunter at Auburn practice. And he did some work. One of the defense or offensive linemen commented that the defense had a really hard time tackling Jarquez Hunter in some live work. I'm told, this is TBD, that he may, from inside Auburn, not direct source on my part, but I think there may be something to it, that they may be considering as much as a first 3 games suspension of Jarquez. I'll leave that to President Roberts, who's doing a fabulous job so far, university president. And is that a big deal? And not necessarily. You get some work for the other backs in 3 games. The Cal game, the second game, is not necessarily we'll go ahead and count it as a W. That's a weird game on the road late at night at Cal. But I think Auburn has the ability to find a way to win that one. So if the 3 games is right, then Hunter comes back with fresh legs for the road trip to College Station, which would be timely.
Well, one thing for sure, Jarquez Hunter's been working out with a lot of the other top running backs in the SEC with Brad Lester. I know and we had Brad scheduled to be on the show last week, and he got stuck on a longer than expected Zoom call with a bunch of coaches, he has to, I texted Brad yesterday and looking forward to getting him on, because I think he's doing more than anybody other than the running backs coaches and Tim Horton at Air Force. God, I love Tim, to save that running back position, Doug. And let's talk about that running back room at Auburn if Jarquez is in fact not going to be eligible in the first 3 games.
Yeah, well, the talk in spring, and it hasn't changed this going into the summer workouts and fall camp, everybody knows what Jarquez can do, and he's the bell cow, no doubt about it. He would be in the rotation arguably at any program in the SEC. Maybe not starter at Ole Miss with Judkins there, but pushing it, and probably any other program in the SEC. I'd have to look at Georgia and Alabama's running back room, but Jarquez is a big-time running back. But Damari Alston got all the talk in the spring. He's rebuilt his body. He's a leader. He's tough. I think he's going to be a special back. Then you look at this kid they brought in, Batee, who's a Minnie Mouse, but can run inside. And Hugh Freeze looks forward to him being more than just an Ontario McCaleb type of back. And then let's not sleep on 4-star, big-time running back Jeremiah Cobb, who, you're worried about freshman holding onto the ball. Remember John Heisman, Rob, if you fumbled this ball, it would be better that you died as a young boy. So, but Cobb they've been him working out in pass patterns because he's got great hands. So they're going to be, and then Sean Jackson, the big bruiser. So you got a plenty of solutions. The question is, can they by committee produce yardage that you would get if you had Jarquez and Alston, sharing carries? I think so. I would certainly want Jarquez in the rotation when you're going on the road to College Station. That's for sure.
Yeah, I listened to Tate Johnson's comments yesterday, speaking for the offensive line group on my friend Bill Cameron's afternoon show, The Drive in Auburn. I really like what he said. And we also talked about Jake Thornton, who left Ole Miss to come to Auburn. He's about only 30 years old, is really challenging that offensive line group. But I like what Tate Johnson said about how close the group is. not just at practice and on the field doing the obligatory, stuff, but it's off the field. You can't have relationships without trust, and trust builds relationships. I like what I'm hearing.
Well, look, anyone listening, please, I encourage you. This is a self-disclosure. Self-awareness matters, Rob. Please adjust by at least 30% that I tend to walk around this time of year, like most fans, and I'm more of a fan than an analyst, Rob, if I'm candid about it. But I tend to have orange and blue colored tinted glasses on a little bit because it's August. Okay. But there's actually some basis for, I think if there is a team in the SEC West, I haven't studied the East nearly as much. I think Kentucky may surprise. Everybody's talking Georgia. Can they beat history or not? The last team to three-peat, trick question, Rob, the last team to three-peat in college football.
Minnesota 36, 37, 38.
The Rob Browne, if nothing else, Rob, besides being a great impersonator of all personalities, he also has a mind like a steel trap. Minnesota, you have to go back into the 30s for God's sake. That's depressing, right? So Georgia's positioned to be a team that can beat history, but I would take the field over Georgia. It's just a smarter play, in my opinion. But anyway, the original question we're after was what? I got off track.
Well, really, the offensive line. I mean, I like what I'm hearing because they actually have some depth in there, and they talked about naming the starting five, but then that 6, 7, and 8, you got to have depth, and without it,
forgive me, the mind is a terrible thing to watch. The point I was going to make, I think in the SEC West, if there is a team that could prove by mid-season to be, wow, they were sneaky better than we gave them a chance at, I think it could be Auburn. But the challenge in trying to forecast that is you're trying to make a ridiculous bet with high margin of error on 20 players brought in through the portal. But what I'm hearing coming out of Lee County, Rob, is that the offensive line looks really improved. I mean, significantly improved. And you've got the running back room with the Jair Shorter and some of the Caleb Burton, the Ohio State transfer, with these wide receivers brought in. The rest of there's a lag between national media knowing what Auburn's really got and what we actually have at the moment. And I think that the storyline was Auburn does not have a good wide receiver room, but that was yesterday's news. We'll have to see in the first few games, do we actually have, and you had, by the way, Rivaldo Fairweather that nobody can cover, big 6'5" tight end. That's a real mismatch and a hybrid. So I think Auburn offensively is more likely to be surprisingly good. By the way, QB room, I think the coaches are saying what they've got to say, but I will be shocked if it's not Peyton Thorne starting. I mean, announced probably before August 20th or so, maybe sooner than that, because he's just showing all the signs of a leader. He's picking up the offense. But Holden Geriner is really spinning the ball beautifully, hearing great, and he can make some plays with his feet is what I'm hearing out of camp. So where does that leave Robbie Ashford? I think you're going to see Robbie Ashford on the field, but as we sit right now, that can certainly change. Ashford could have all the light bulbs go off throwing the ball in the next week or two, but if he doesn't, I think you still see a place for Ashford somehow or another in this offense, down in the red zone, running some wildcat, and keeping his head in the game. So, all of a sudden you've got a quarterback room that's got a little bit of depth to it.
Well, Robbie Ashford is the fastest quarterback I've ever seen in an Auburn jersey. Faster than Cam Newton, faster than Nick Marshall, faster than Charlie Thomas out of Thomasville, Georgia, who played with Charlie Trotman back in the late 70s. He's got to be on that field and step it up. If he's not the starter, let's see another Cody Burns. I mean, Cody Burns will always be loved by Auburn people for what he did when Chris Todd was named the quarterback. And it's critical. And I love what you just said. Stop the presses. I mean, I almost want to go to the technical difficulties. Remember this one?
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, I don't know if
because what you just said about the national media not knowing
Oh,
what's going on down there. I
look,
love what you said. Only you can say that.
cover. That's why I prefer niche reporting. I just look at a couple Auburn and a couple other teams, a little bit the SEC. It's just too hard to be on top of it trying to cover 110 teams. But so they're going to be wrong and they're going to be way behind in their information. But if you look at, you said Ashford's faster than Nick Marshall. I'd like to see the two of them in a 100-yard dash or a 40-yard dash. I'm not so sure. It would be a dead heat if you ask me. But I would love to see Ashford in that Gus Malzahn 2013 offense, wouldn't you, Rob?
Oh, God. I mean, I guess I love the kids. Yeah. No, but I just love the kids from Birmingham. I love when Auburn has. I mean, I've got it with me right now. My Pat Sullivan jersey, man, that he signed for me I've had that thing since 1970. And then Birmingham, it's because it's 3 hours and 20 minutes from Memphis. Those two cities, very much in common. They both have great medical centers. The difference is you got two anchors, and Memphis has about 15 schools competing for space with the University of Memphis. But Robbie Ashford, I still think he's training, isn't he, in the overpass down there by Top Shelf Golf in downtown Birmingham? He did during the summer, but
God knows it will be exciting for Auburn fans to see him on the field. And you'll see him the first three games. Well, at least two of the first three, because Auburn should annex a pretty big lead if things go well. But and I'm not taking any game for granted, believe me. But let me go rapid fire. You're not at break right now, are you, Rob?
No. And stay, Doug. I want you to promise me this. Stay on if you can, because Jake Wimberly from Jackson's going to be on right after in the next few minutes. And I want to get into these matrix because that's what you're really good at is the analytics as well as painting the big picture. But I'm going to say this: the smoking sign is on, and the unfasten your seatbelt is signed. So walk around the cabin, and the bar's open. Meeting's adjourned.
Yeah, here, and I'm gonna go really fast. But in case people wondered, is this a compelling year in the SEC or not? Of course it is, and a lot because of some unknowns. Last year we had the knowns of can Georgia repeat and can Stetson Bennett come back and play well again? Yeah. Will he keep the starting job? And we saw how that played out. We had the unknown of, you figured Bryce Young in his second year is it's almost an automatic that, and Will Anderson, Alabama wins it, but that's why they play, right? Tennessee and LSU were the X factor as it turned out. But just rapid fire a few of these most compelling stories. To me, Tommy Rees, the OC brought from Notre Dame, and drug with him Tyler Buckner. Can Buckner be the guy, or is it Milroe? And meanwhile, does it matter? Because Saban is telling those who will listen, I think I want to go pound and ground again and protect my defense. So I'm going to watch the Saban coaching strategy line with offensively with great interest because, you know, we all have we always want to return to the scene of the crime after a killing, right? And Saban he might not be able to resist himself, say, I really liked it better the way we did it, just mashing people. And, you know, even though the game might be closer, will Saban, if he gets behind 10 in a game, will he stick with that running game like you saw Dye and Stallings do to make it to the fourth quarter and then you're stronger? Second one, can Georgia beat history, or will they run into a speed bump with a new quarterback? And, you know, if we see Auburn play well and go to College Station and win, all of a sudden that Auburn hosting Georgia, not that you would pick Auburn, but it looks a little tricky for Georgia because the only time they would have tested their quarterback is at home the week before against South Carolina, but not on the road. You still probably Georgia's a 2 double-digit favorite, but that one looks interesting. Should you sell your Alabama stock right now with what Saban plans to do running the ball? Not if you ask me. Saban's going to have to show me that he's lost it. I don't think he has, and God knows he's got the roster. Is Joe Milton at Tennessee going to prove that Heupel is a system guy, or is he a talented quarterback guy? I don't know, but it's going to be fun to watch. Does Brian Kelly at LSU have a sophomore slump in his second year, or do they win big? He's got two players on both sides of the ball, as you know, that give him a chance to have a really monster year, with the big one being the road trip to Tuscaloosa. and here's a biggie, big biggie that will predict the future of Jimbo Fisher. Is Jimbo and Bobby Petrino a honeymoon or more like a rapidly approaching divorce this year? I don't think there's any middle ground. Do we see any Shane Beamer miracles? I mentioned that September 16th trip to Georgia. They also were at Tennessee September 30th. And then the one to watch is October 28th, Texas A&M. Can South Carolina pull a miracle or two? Maybe my favorite, if you get outside of Auburn, can Lane Kiffin, who looked like a disgraced Southern lawyer with his hair at SEC Media Days. Am I right?
I was right there. I thought he looked great. He looked like he'd been at the beach is what he looked like.
Well, I got to give Ty Hildebrandt at Solid Verbal Podcast props for that line. A disgraced Southern lawyer look by Lane Kiffin.
Yeah.
Apparently chicks dig the mussed up hair look these days. So can Ole Miss and it's probably going to be Dart. He looks like he's the guy, the heir apparent. Can they look like Lane Kiffin offenses usually do and really not look like they're an unproven, untested quarterback? Because right now, across the SEC, but if you look at quarterbacks, KJ Jefferson at Archie, Jaden Daniels, the big timer at LSU, and he'll have the supporting cast to do a lot. Will Rogers at State, but Leach is gone. Rest in peace. And then Spencer Rattler at South Carolina. So the one that stands out is Jaden Daniels. But we'll have to see, does Peyton Thorne at Auburn or one of the quarterbacks at Alabama or Dart at Ole Miss, do they look more like a veteran quarterback or not? So, and that's just a few. Meanwhile, can Auburn exceed expectations on what is, I guess, a 7.5 win over and under?
Yeah. Hold those thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. God, what a series, a litany of compelling points, storylines. I love this stuff. We'll be right back. Doug Dean down in Birmingham, Rob Browne over here in Cross County right after this quick commercial message on Sidelines.
Red River Ford and Toyota, located in Wynne, Arkansas. If you're in the market for a new or used car, truck, or SUV, call, go online, or drop by and see them. Located 45 minutes from Memphis, go off the 4-city exit on I-40 and go north about 15 minutes on Highway 1. Easy to work with and still believe in customer service. If you live out of town, they will deliver your vehicle to you. RedRiverFordToyota.com. Just see what they can do.
Strengthen your seed zone this spring with quality tillage equipment from House Industries. Located in Cherry Valley, Arkansas, House Industries specializes in manufacturing superior equipment that will minimize your downtime and keep you working in the field. To ensure the highest quality control, all design, fabrication, and testing takes place in a 99,000 square foot manufacturing facility located right here in the heart of the Delta. Locate your nearest House equipment dealer online at houseindustriesinc.com.
House Industries, breaking ground.
Sidelines with Rob Browne. Talk sporty to me.
All right. Hold on.
You better believe I'll talk sporty to you.
Yeah, I'm right. I'll tell you who will talk sporty to you. Bow.
Oh, my God.
How you doing, Bow?
I would encourage any fan to search YouTube for Mildred on Paul Feinbaum, and you will get lost in a vortex laughing for an hour.
You will. You really will. I mean, you just think about Mildred. She's got to be pushing triple digits now. Wow. I think back, Mildred's got to be pushing 103 right now. Jake Wimberly, The Afternoon Drive, ESPN 105.9 in Jackson, Mississippi. Great show, great content every day. Again, like Doug Dean, prepares for every show. He's not in there scrambling. You don't hear a bunch of newspapers in the background and him looking at Google and stuff. It's all in the cranium like it is with Doug Dean. The best lawyers, the best guests already know what they're talking about. We have been on a roll. Jake, if I twist your arm, will you talk some college football with us on this Wednesday morning?
Please.
Yeah, you caught me on the right day. Today is the day I guess I will do that.
Okay. Hey,
Jake,
man.
you get me mid-August. I led with this quote from long ago about if I can, it's mid-August and it's hot as hell and feels like it will be for all eternity. But if I can just make it 2 or 3 weeks, they'll be playing football and everything will be all right.
That's right. Absolutely. 100% agree.
I love it.
And are people, Mississippi State and Ole Miss fans, I'm going to stick around for a second and I'll get out of your way, Rob. Are they as stoked, but obviously each of the two schools for very different reasons? Mississippi State fans, who I consider brothers, there's a fraternity there with Auburn, kind of. They want to, they still lament the passing of the great Mike Leach, but they're excited about where they're headed. And Ole Miss is asking themselves, can we see Lane Kiffin explode and have one of those big years that you've seen him have before? What's the vibe in the state of Mississippi?
No, I think you kind of nailed it, Doug. I mean, you start with Ole Miss and very excited about their quarterback situation. Be it Jackson Dart, who is performing well in camp, to Spencer Sanders, who also is performing well in camp, and then you look at some of the young guys that they have coming in. A lot of rave reviews from Centurion Perkins, a freshman linebacker out of Raleigh, Mississippi. He's going to be a star there. Also, Aiden Williams, a receiver out of Ridgeland, just down the road from where I sit today. He's going to be a star. So I think you're right. I mean, I think they're hoping that Lane Kiffin, if Jackson Dart can have that Matt Corral year 2 flip and put up a big numbers, that Ole Miss will have a chance to be a really good football team. And the same thing for Mississippi State is there's a lot of excitement around that program. A lot of people in Starkville reminding people that, hey, Mike Leach, rest in peace, had built this team to perform this year. And of course, with a new offense under Kevin Barbay and with Will Rogers back and a lot of guys on that defensive side, there's expectations in both camps as, we approach mid-August.
Is there a worry level? There's not in my mind. I mean, you can hire a 60-year-old who's been around the block forever and they can have a tough year anywhere unexpectedly. But Zach Arnett, what is he, 36? Is that a worry level for any fans?
Yeah, I mean, it's a concern for some. I mean, you hear that concern. A lot of people feel, I say a lot. Some feel that, hey, look, this team was built around the air raid, so they're totally flipping the offense. So maybe it's going to be a disaster. But it's a small percentage of people that feel that way. I mean, I look at the staff around Zach Arnett. I mean, I look at the fact that Kevin Barbay is an experienced coordinator. Zach Arnett knows defense. He's got a guy they're calling, that's going to be helping him call that defense. That's experience. You look at some of the guys he brought back, for David Turner and, Brad Peterson in the front office and Greg Knox and Chad Bumpus and others. He's got a bunch of good football coaches around him. So, that to me, tells me that obviously Zach Arnett knows what he's doing. Now we'll see if, how these coaches perform in pressure cooker situations. I mean, that's things we don't ever hear is maybe a play doesn't get, called right, in the last 2 minutes of the half, trying to set up for a field goal, or maybe there's a miscommunication between a defensive coach and a position unit that causes a coverage bust. Those are things we just don't know. But as from 10,000 foot, it looks like he's done a great job with the staff he's got.
I don't want to make your segment about Auburn, but I think if I'm a fan of or analyst of either of your two great schools, you look at the road trip to Jordan-Hare Stadium, and that Auburn's a beatable team this year, if I'm being fair. Ole Miss and Mississippi State have the talent to beat Auburn on the road this year. That's kind of a swing game if you want to have what fans would consider a great year. You agree, Jake?
100%. But I caution everybody that, hey, look, Hugh Freeze has kind of overperformed, especially early, everywhere he's been. I mean, you look at what he did at Arkansas State. He really jumped off great there at Ole Miss with Bo Wallace. He did the same thing. And one thing we know about Hugh Freeze is he can coach quarterbacks. And you look at the transfer coming in from Michigan State, a very modest but good stat line. I would expect that him and Robbie Ashford in some sort of a combination, he's going to get good quarterback play. So it's not going to be just as easy as Mississippi State rolling into Jordan-Hare Stadium and just grabbing a win. They're going to have to go get it. This is going to be a really fun Auburn team to watch it, and they're going to be much better 2 months from now than they even are today.
Along the lines of what Doug is saying, look at Mississippi State in the last few years. Zach Arnett, I think he's only 33. I mean, to make it even more of a compelling story, he's a young guy. But the fact that he's been, Doug and Jake, for 3 years, he worked with Mike Leach. He understands how to attack a defense. Now he's the head coach. Jake, let's talk about his replacement, who his defensive coordinator is going to be. Let's talk about their relationship, because that's going to be critical to the success or lack thereof of Mississippi State this year. Got to have that.
Yeah, no, you've got to have it, and you're right. I mean, that's going to be, again, that's going to, when you look at like Mississippi State and Ole Miss, for instance, Mississippi State, LSU, week 3, right after week 2, Arizona, then Alabama, South Carolina. I mean, there's not a whole lot of room for error there, right? So, I mean, you're going to know early what this team is. Same way for Ole Miss, week 2 trip down at Tulane. So, I mean, everything's got to be buttoned up and everything's got to be done right, especially for, what I would consider mid-tier recruiters like Mississippi State, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Kentucky. You're going to find yourself in a lot of 4-quarter ball games, and everything's got to be buttoned up just right.
Well, where there are no easy games, and you got Arizona in week 2.
That is correct.
Yeah. So, and I don't know they're in the Pac-12 now. They're going to the Big 12. I'm with Doug. I think they go on the road, and Mississippi State under Mike Leach last year, they won 9 games. I mean, and they were not super talented, but the guy that I don't understand about in quarterback is why Will Rogers isn't. I mean, I think KJ Jefferson's a great dual threat quarterback. I think he's the best because of his size. You can argue Jaden Daniels, but as a pure quarterback, Doug, would you agree Will Rogers is a special player? I mean, now,
Well,
in fairness, Jake watched him since he was about 8 years old playing Rankin, Mississippi.
Rob, there's no. I mean, it's painful, and I have post-traumatic Mississippi State syndrome from the Will Rogers coming to Jordan-Hare and coming from behind 27 points or something ridiculous like that, and I would rather give Mike Leach and State credit for that than I would make excuses for Auburn playing questionable, poor, layback defense. But Will Rogers is. You can make the case that he's the most capable, efficient quarterback coming back, and I would even include Jaden Daniels when I say that.
Jake, this is like crossfire. Morton Kondrecki. Jake, respond.
I mean, look, I agree. I have full, I guess you could say, belief in Will Rogers' ability to perform. And again, you're talking about a guy that I have watched play since he was about in 8th grade. And I know high school football is not the same thing as the Southeastern Conference, but Will comes from a football family. His father is a fantastic football coach, and was highly respected by Mike Leach for what he did. With Gardner Minshew, that started that tutelage to Will Rogers, and now he's got another one at Brandon High School that's going to be an all-state quarterback that's committed right now to Gulf Coast Mississippi Community College. That's a quarterback family. And, when you look at Will Rogers and his ability to perform, and I think it's unfair for Will, and not only just Will, but there's a perception amongst college football fans that it may be somewhat warranted, but that air raid quarterbacks typically can just produce their system guys, and they produce in the system, so to speak. But you can't. I mean, I'll tell you this: you couldn't put me in the air raid and me do that. I can't even throw a football. So and hit the broadside of a barn. So I think he's one of the more accurate passers in the country, and I think that this offense is going to really show and highlight the fact that Will Rogers is a comparable quarterback.
I would add, before I get out of your hair, Rob, I would add that the Will Rogers I've watched play and enjoyed watching a lot is a street fighter. I mean, I remember Jeff Berger at Auburn. This is a guy that, when you fourth and goal at the 1, what was the NFL line? I want the bourbon drinkers, not the milk drinkers. And I think Will Rogers is a street fighter, and you can go a long way in tight games. And when you play in the SEC and you're not named Alabama or Georgia, you're going to have some tight games, right? Rob, Jake, in the words of Carl in Sling Blade, I like the way you talk, Jake.
Thank you, Doug. Love that movie, too.
I'm going to get out, guys. Have a good
Well,
one.
Doug, look, man, great insight as always. Stay on as long as you can. Love it when you're able to co-host with me. I love it. But you made a lot of great points. And, Doug, that thing about Will Rogers, and I'm getting comments from someone, he's just a system QB. You hear that over and over, and he's a damn good quarterback. And Jake, I like what you said, that put me in that system. I couldn't do it.
No, absolutely. And look, Mike Leach had a theory, and this is a long time ago. And everybody can go a different direction on this. It's all opinions. But Mike Leach had a theory is, hey, when a kid gets about in 11th or 12th grade, they're what they're going to be as far. Now they can get bigger, they can get stronger, they can get a little faster, but you are either an accurate passer or you're not, and you're not going to be able to coach a kid into being a more accurate passer. I mean, you can get them a little better at reading defenses. You can get them a little better. He said that was his belief always, is either you're accurate or not. And Will Rogers, for as long as I have watched him play football, has been an accurate quarterback. And that tells you a lot right there. I mean, especially because that's what you want. I mean, look, all this talk about Joe Milton III, he may be the next coming of Cam Newton, where Cam Newton and Joe Burrow have a baby. I have no idea. We got to see it. But when you look at Will Rogers, the one thing we know is he's accurate as all get out. And when you're accurate and complete passes and put the ball in tight windows, it doesn't matter what system you're running. Now, obviously, you couldn't put Will Rogers in the Dan Mullen, power spread offense and run him that way. But when you're talking about pure passing and the capability to read defenses and move the chains, he can do that.
Yeah, and the fact that he had 3 years to learn on top of what he learned growing up with a father who's a coach. And that is invaluable. And always the question is, can someone like that be coached by another coach? And yes, he can. See, he passed that test. And to say that someone is a system quarterback is to think that and to assume that you're just putting them out there and they're like a robot. No. I mean, he has broken a lot of Southeastern Conference records. And he's not doing that because he's just a bot out there, like a lot of Twitter followers, Man, I'm amazed at these women. I mean, it would be flattering to think all these women, they're bots. I mean, every day they're like going, right. Sleazella wants to follow you. You're like, I don't think so, Sleazella. or Horinia. I mean, come on, good God. But
not today, ISIS.
That's right. But the guy's a hell of a quarterback. Now, I watched him at SEC Media Days. The way he handles himself. I think he was there 10, 11 hours just going interview to interview to interview. He's a big kid. He looks like he's gained 15 pounds from last year. And the guys, Zach Arnett, that's a guy, man, you're going to fight. That you want him on your side. He's a brawler. That guy's tough. And I thought it was really cool how Zach Arnett referenced the fact, you know where he's from, don't you? Albuquerque. And he's got connection to Joe Lee Dunn, who was at New Mexico in that 3-3-5 defense. I think Zach Arnett is a lot smarter and more capable than people want to give him credit for. Oh, he was just there with Mike Leach. Man, if you can have a defense help you win 9 games with that kind of offense, with the pressure that puts on the defense, without being 2 and 3 deep at every position across the front 7, you're a damn good coach. Question is, can he handle being a head coach? Because when you're a head coach, you don't get to coach as much as you did as a coordinator. Fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. It's fair to say. And I don't know that we judge Zach Arnett just on, just this one season. I think we have to see, what this team is going to look like as he continues to build it in his image. And, again, Mississippi State has a tough stretch with Arizona and LSU and Alabama and South Carolina. And if Mississippi State was to start out, 1-3 in that stretch, a lot of people will hit the panic button, but I don't think that's going to be necessary. I think that you have to see this team get through this year, see what this year brings, and then see what next year brings for him.
Yeah. Interesting comments from a viewer down in New Hope, Alabama. Will Rogers' system is move the chains. Kid is legit. Will play a long time in the NFL. That's from Curtis Lowe down in New Hope, Alabama. I agree with that. His job, move the chains. Call him what you want, but damn it, he gets the job done. That's what you're hiring him for. I don't know. I don't want to know. Have you ever been to a hog rendering farm before, to a plant where they make sausage and bacon?
Yeah.
It's pretty gross, okay? But the end product is delicious. I mean, I tell you, a company right in your backyard that makes some great sausage down in Flowood, Mississippi, Country Pleasing. You ever had that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And actually that's in Florence, right down the road.
Florence.
Yeah.
My apologies.
No, that's okay.
MJ got us hooked on it. They make a 3-cheese sausage that we throw on the grill over here with slices of cheese on crackers with some barbecue sauce or some barbecue rub. I mean, come on. If you're going to the chair, the guillotine, the gallows, load up on some of that country pleasing. But
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. So you think about this. Let's talk about high school football in that area around Jackson. The last few years, I remember Marcus Woodson, my friend, he was on the staff at Auburn. He's at Florida State. Now he's at Arkansas. He's from Moss Point, Mississippi. And I said, there was a period of time when 37 kids from Moss Point played at Mississippi State over about a 15-year, 20-year period. What's happened on the Gulf Coast down there in Biloxi, Gulf Point? I mean, I just Moss Point, past Christiane, the famous, Fawn Leibowitz was killed in a kiln explosion. Is it Kiln, Mississippi, or Kill, where Brett Favre is from? But they play great football in that state. Here's a myth. I've got to ask you this question, and I got to know this. In Mississippi, I've always been told there's 17 junior colleges. The way they count a C and a D is a 65 or 70, something funny about it. That's why so many of these kids in Alabama or Arkansas or Louisiana are eligible, and in Mississippi they're not. If you look at the Jackson Clarion Ledger top 40 players in a given year, historically 15 or 20 of those 40 can't get in school. So they go to junior college, and then they just scatter everywhere. What have they done in Mississippi to change that, to help schools like Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and Southern Miss, and Alcorn State, Mississippi Valley State, and whoever else?
Yeah, as far as the grading scale in the junior colleges is concerned, I'm not too up to date on that. I mean, typically you're talking about a 10-point scale. That's kind of where a lot of people have lived. But if you look at the top, for instance, if you go to 247sports.com this year and go to the top players in the state of Mississippi, I mean, a lot of these guys, and we'll see, they're committed to Power 5 and Group of 5 schools. So we'll see, if some of those kids make it or if they don't make it. I mean, so I think you've got to give credit to the state of Mississippi high schools that they've done a much better job preparing these kids to be ready for college, and to be academically eligible. To your point about the Mississippi Gulf Coast, I'll tell you what happened, Rob, with the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Katrina happened. After Katrina happened, there was a mass exodus of families, a lot of scattering of people. Now, obviously, the Mississippi Gulf Coast has done a great job of building back. It's back really beautiful, Ocean Springs, Biloxi, Gulfport, really, really beautiful place. But they just have not had the quality of football, especially in the higher levels of Mississippi high school football. We're talking, 7A, 6A type football that they had prior to Katrina. And I think Katrina's the big equalizer there. Now, when you get down into the lower levels, and I say lower levels, you can go down one level, 5A. Picayune High School, pound for pound, is as good as any high school in the state of Mississippi. They just sent a big running back to Oregon this past year. They've got 2 or 3 big Division I players on that team this year. So, I mean, there's still some really good football down there. But your Moss Points of the world, they've kind of dried up. And, they're still playing football, but not nearly what they were early 2000s prior to Katrina.
Yeah. And I remember Katrina, of course, we all do August 29th of 2005. And a lot of those kids went to Memphis. A lot of them went to Montgomery and Mobile and Birmingham and Atlanta. And now they're playing at Auburn, Georgia, Alabama, and LSU. But as bad as it was in New Orleans, round 0 was, I think, past Christiane.
Waveland.
Just like Waveland. Okay.
Yeah.
Waveland.
Right next door. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember, because as a kid, I remember we stopped religiously at Beauvoir down there and always would go there, and it got hit. But what I also remember is you think about the mass exodus of people that have left, and it hurts. It really does. And then you've got the capital, on the top of Mississippi in here, DeSoto County, 170,000 people in that county. But yeah, the great programs on the Gulf Coast, that's an interesting take. I mean, because they need those to produce. I mean, and they historically have been absolutely just solid gold for sending players, mainly to Mississippi State. And Jake, here's another one I got for you. Got a good friend. They're a farm family from down in Tunica County, been down there for a long time. He told me years ago, he said, the reason Mississippi State does so well with the rural communities, and there are a lot of them in Mississippi, which is a great thing, is because the county ag extension agents. You got 2 Hank Gimbles, like on Green Acres, in every county in Mississippi. But state has always done really well in recruiting the state of Mississippi, better than anybody. And they just got a connection, and that's a spiritual connection, an agrarian connection to the land, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there is something to that. I mean, Mississippi State, I mean, you can go all the way back to Jackie Sherrill. They did a really good job of recruiting, guys in the Mississippi Delta prior to the population boom in DeSoto County. So, yeah, I mean, I think there is something to be said about that. And as the state of Mississippi has continued to grow and more talent has moved in and been, cultivated here, it's brought in other players too. So, Mississippi State and Ole Miss now obviously have to fight off the Alabamas and the Auburns and LSU's. I mean, Texas A&M, one of their top defensive linemen this year, McKinley Jackson, right out of that Gulf Coast area down at George County. So a lot more talent, a lot better job kind of bringing this whole thing full circle. I think with the Mississippi high school, academic situation has made those situations better. They can always still improve that. But then when you look at the talent around the state, it's brought in other players as well. So we don't lack for Southeastern Conference schools moving around this state looking at football talent. Yeah,
and McKinley Jackson from Loosedale, Highway 98, when you go from Hattiesburg to Mobile, about 100 miles or so. I ask you about Southern Miss. I always want to, because I want to see them get better, because when they're better, I mean, it's fun. Again, they are they have their own world, and I think that's cool. They're not worried. They live by control the controllables, control what we can control. We can't control what happens in Oxford or Starkville. The Fighting Halls, let's talk about them. What are you hearing out of practice up to this point? How they're looking in their stretches and their warm-ups, because that's about all you can see.
I think they're excited about this football team. They got a big quarterback competition going on down there. Wilkie, the quarterback who played last year, they brought in a couple transfer quarterbacks, a young kid from Clemson who they're very, very high on at the quarterback position. They got one of the better running backs in the country in Frank Gore Jr., who is the best running back in that conference in the Sun Belt. So, this team is going to be, much like Ole Miss, they could be better this year, but their schedule is really brutal. A trip to Florida State this year. They get some of the tougher teams in the Sun Belt. I think for Will Hall, I mean, look, and he's done a fantastic job of finding kids in the state of Mississippi. If you look at his recruiting class for this cycle coming in 2024, as of a month ago, and I think I looked at it about 3 weeks ago, every kid on that recruiting class that's committed to them are from the state of Mississippi. So Southern Miss kind of got away from that for a long time. Between Jeff Bauer and you go into the Larry Fedora era and on, kind of getting outside the state of Mississippi. Will Hall is a Mississippi guy. His dad was is a Mississippi Hall of Fame high school football coach, Bobby Hall. So Will knows this state very well. He knows, the importance of recruiting the state of Mississippi, and they're doing that. And I like the way he has got this program moving. I mean, people forget last year, Tulane lost 2 ball games in a season. They played in the Cotton Bowl, beat USC. One of the teams that beat Tulane last year on the road was Southern Mississippi.
Yeah, and you talk about the Tulane program. That one, I mean, winning the Cotton Bowl, beating Southern Cal. Pratt is back at quarterback. We're again myopically on the SEC because of geography, and we get into the ACC on this show. Like I say, we're SEC based, Memphis based. We talk about Memphis, the SEC, and your favorite team. I love talking about the Sun Belt. Love talking about all these other conferences, Conference USA, American Athletic Conference, because it's football. And you know what? All these head coaches had to start somewhere. And guess what? None of them, when they were 25, were the head coach of an SEC school. That's why these programs that we're talking about are so important, that they're successful. And look, I know you've got a hard exit here at 9:00. You got a plane to catch, but let people know how they can follow you. Great content, and if there's any updates on your, analytics, your matrix, and all that you do, because it's great stuff. And as always, we really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. It means a lot to us, our listeners, and our viewers.
No, absolutely. I appreciate that. We will have a lot of updates coming up. Right now, obviously, we're in, like everybody else, kind of predicting season, talking season. But with sports gaming here, especially in the state of Mississippi, a lot of plays, weekly plays that we'll be doing. So we'll be pumping that out. You can get that on Twitter at JakeWim, CFBHourglass.com. We'll be putting out some stuff, high school football stuff. But if you want to stream the show 3 to 6 every day, the zone1059.com. Rob, I appreciate you as always, and I know we'll have you on here very, very soon.
Love being on there. Your show is well organized. You got a great producer as well. Every day, folks, down in Jackson, Mississippi. Take care, Jake.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
All right. You bet. Let me say something real quick before we head out to College Station and talk to our man, the pride, the favorite son, the man who has the key to the city to White Oak, Texas, a town of 2,500 with a stadium that holds over 5,000, and they pack it in for every game. Let me just get this out. Coming up October 2nd, 8 a.m., the first ever. There's a dinner the night before as well. The first ever St. Paul Open to benefit the Bishop Peter J. 901-647-3014. They need a few more teams. Flag sponsors and whole sponsorships are still available. They need money, participants, items donated in lieu of cash. That is the first ever St. Paul Open. And keep in mind, the great folks out there, Hewlett & Dunn Boot and Clothing Company on the historic square. It's the most beautiful square that I know of in the South. That's the historic square in Collierville, Tennessee. Hewlett & Dunn Boot and Clothing Company open Monday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Get around Christmas after Thanksgiving, Black Friday and all that. They're open on Sundays, but that'll be Christmas. They're getting new brands in every day. Pendleton, Schaefer Outdoors, Danner, Vask, Light Boots, Hire invented the cowboy boot. And I guarantee you, Olin Buchanan knows that Hire invented the cowboy boot. But great folks out there, Hewlett & Dunn. Damn proud to be associated with them, to have them as a sponsor, as we are all of them. And again, to all of our listeners and viewers everywhere, we're going to bring in one of the best guys out here, the man from White Oak, Texas. I always keep thinking he's from Katy, Texas. No. He's from White Oak. He has one of the greatest office locations in the world. Opens his door, and he's almost on the practice field. But anything exciting happening out there in College Station? A little football talk?
Well, yeah, there's always a lot of excitement around Texas A&M football, especially this time of year. Aggies are nothing if not optimistic, typically every year. And they've learned to be cautiously optimistic. We got our first discussion with Bobby Petrino on Sunday. And I think just the things he had to say and the way he carried himself, the attitude, everything, I think that made Aggies a whole lot more optimistic because, they've been hearing from the national media ever since Petrino was hired. Oh, there's no way this is going to work. These egos are going to collide. And just the way, again, Bobby presented himself, it seemed like he was reinforcing the idea that there's no issue. Jimbo's the boss. I'm here. I know what my role is. I'm going to do my role. And Bobby says, I have great players to work with. So we'll never know if it's going to work or not until the season gets started. But it gave you, if you're an Aggie, another reason, like I said, to be cautiously optimistic.
Olin, one of the things about you that I like is you're always next to Kirk Bowles at media days, which gives you your boat. I know. That's right. Hey, Kirk, 50 people could have their hands up in that big room and waiting. And, you're doing this with your arm and that with your arm. Kirk Bowles raises his hand. Kirk Bowles, Austin American statesman. Dave Cody filled me in about both of y'all. And Dave listens every day out in Washington. But dadgummit, what I love about you is, let's go back to this Bobby Petrino thing. Everybody remembers what happened at Arkansas. God dang, that was 11 years ago. He asked for forgiveness. The people at the Touchdown Club in Little Rock applauded him. If it's time to move on from all that stuff. The guy's a great coach. I remember when they hired him, I asked Tommy Tuberville about this. I said, where did you find this guy? He was with the Jacksonville Jaguars back in 2002 when he replaced his offensive coordinator. Well, go back and look at Bobby's dad. He's from Montana. So he's probably got a little bit of rip in him. He probably knows where the train station is, okay? But his father was a 29-year coaching NAIA legend at University of Montana. The guy has grown up, like the Bowdens, like the Dooleys, and the Mannings. He's a football family. He's a hell of a coach. You know what I think? It fuels all this stuff about Jimbo Fisher and Bobby Petrino, I think deep down people are scared to death and staying up at night of what if this does work? Because I can tell you, I know people that have coached with Bobby Petrino. The guy is a genius. He's scary good.
Well, let's hope. If you're an Aggie, let's hope. Right? Here's what I can win. Last year's at Missouri State. They played Arkansas, and in that game, Missouri State went into the fourth quarter with the lead. Missouri State had 409 yards of total offense and scored 27 points. The very next week, Arkansas plays A&M. A&M has 343 yards of offense, and the A&M offense scores 14 points? Because
not many. Because the defense won the game.
They won the game like 23-21. So the A&M offense scored 16, I think. But one of the touchdowns was a defensive touchdown. So you say what Bobby Petrino was able to do against an SEC team with guys from Missouri State. Give him the caliber of athletes that A&M has, and again, you start thinking, well, what are the possibilities? Now, unfortunately, we know all too well that potential and possibilities don't always become results. But you still, hey, you put the canvas in front of Picasso and give him a whole lot of paint, and you think that maybe he's going to come up with something special, and maybe that's kind of the situation here. There's plenty of paint. Here's the canvas. What are you going to do for you, Petrino?
I've never heard it put like that, but that's why you're a great writer, but you're a great storyteller. Something about people from Texas, but you just put it in the vernacular as well as I've heard it done. Bobby Petrino, he schemes so well in real time during games. That's what I've noticed about him. And again, for a country of people that say we don't forgive enough, they're right. We don't forgive enough. Again, move on. The guy can coach. Everywhere he goes, he wins. And he's a little gruff or whatever. Well, I don't know him. You've been around him. What's he like?
Well, I'm going to tell you this. I've heard about him, how gruff he is, and just a tough guy. We said a taskmaster, and yet Sunday he came on more like a Zen master. He was very calm, somewhat philosophical. I mean, look, it was a 23-minute press conference. You don't ever want to base a complete evaluation of somebody on a 23-minute press conference, but based on that 23, and the things he had to say, he was just so calm. It was nothing like what we've heard the guy he is from what we've heard of he was at Louisville or Arkansas or some other places. And part of that, I guess, is because his role is different. At least that's what he said. He said, hey, I don't have to yell at officials now. All I've got to do is take some pretty good quarterbacks and some really good receivers and some running backs that I really like their potential and try to get them all going in the same direction and playing as well as they can.
Yeah. And Jimbo Fisher, the guy can flat out recruit, and he can also coach quarterbacks. And I mean, I first watched him when he came from Samford. I think he was 25 or 26 when he joined Terry Bowden in 93 at Auburn. And there are a lot of people at Auburn that really like Jimbo and watched him for a long time. Now people want to criticize him. They just, he's smart enough to hire Bobby Petrino. And I don't think that he would go ask for the money to bring him in if he wasn't willing to say, I'm gonna let him have a certain amount of control. But if you're an Auburn fan, Gus Malzahn, we're going to get butter, Butter. We're going to get butter. He would bring in someone and would never let him have that freedom. In the 6 years you've been around Jimbo Fisher, what's your gut telling you?
Look, Jimbo's kind of been his own worst enemy in terms of opening himself up for criticism, because too often he's been asked, hey, is Bobby going to call the plays? How much control is he going to have on the offense? And then Jimbo will say, hopefully he will. You're like, hopefully. You're the guy that man. But then he goes on like Feinbaum or somebody else says, he's going to call a play. So just give a consistent message. And so that opens up for speculation, because you're not given, or scrutiny, I should say, because you're not given a consistent message. I thought Bobby made it clear that he that he's going to be calling the plays. Now, you mentioned Gus Malzahn, and I'll say, who did Gus Malzahn bring in to call the plays? When he would say, no, I'm going to start taking it over. Was it anybody as accomplished as Bobby Petrino? Was it somebody that was maybe his contemporary? Was it somebody that has the background of saying, hey, if this isn't going, if I feel like I've been told the wrong thing, if I feel like I've been misled, will he just leave in the middle of the season? Which I don't know that Bobby would do that, but he has a track record of leaving before the season was over, Atlanta Falcons. So I tend to think that while Jimbo is going to be involved, as well as a head coach should be, I know that we had a head coach here once before that let his offense coordinator call all the plays with a 34-point lead and 17 minutes to go, and A&M blew that lead, and maybe the head coach should have got on the headset and said, hey, let's start running the ball instead of throwing it. We got a 34-point lead. So you want your head coach to have some input. You talk about, you're an Auburn guy, right?
Yes.
You might remember an Auburn LSU game from about 95, right?
I was there.
LSU's got a 21-point lead and throws like 4 pick sixes. Maybe the head coach should have got on and said, look, stop throwing the damn ball. Let's run the ball, right?
Yep.
So you want your head coach to have some input.
Yeah.
But, you also want an offensive coordinator that's calling the plays that knows what he's doing, so the head coach doesn't necessarily have to get involved in that way. So, we'll see how it works out. I'm somewhat optimistic that, hey, you bring in Bobby Petrino, you don't bring him in and then undermining. If I've said this before, maybe while talking to you, had Jimbo brought in an up and coming guy, then I would be questioning how much rope Jimbo would give that.
Yes.
And the first time the offense may not be moving as crisply as he'd like, then I would be more, I would think Jimbo would be more likely to step in. Now, this young guy, he doesn't know what he thinks he knows. But when you bring in a guy like Bobby Petrino that's older than Jimbo and has done it longer, I think you bring in a guy like that and you say, okay, here's the keys, drive us.
Yeah.
So I guess Bobby is Jimbo's chauffeur.
Yeah, that's right. He is driving Mr. Fisher, the great. I mean, but you're right. If you bring in a young one, he's going to have less. I wouldn't want to be trying to fight with Bobby Petrino during a game. I mean, if you bring him in, you got to let him coach. I mean, that's the one thing in business. If you hire somebody, you got to let them do their job. And if you're micromanaging them and looking over their shoulder all the time, it'll drive them crazy. And typically they'll leave because Bobby Petrino will be gobbled up by a lot of people. And I think he's also trying to work his way back into a Power 5 head coaching job. And why wouldn't he?
Well, if he has success at A&M, why wouldn't you look at Bobby? And I know that, like you mentioned, he had his incident back in 2013. But he's atoned for that. He's served his penance. And quite frankly, if you look, I say the SEC West is the division of forgiveness. When you look at all the coaches in the West that have had issues, from Brian Kelly. I don't want to talk about what his issues is, but you probably know about the incident in Notre Dame. Lane Kiffin certainly had his issues. Let's see, who else am I thinking about? Well, anyway, there are others.
Hugh Freeze.
Thank you. That's what
in the interest of full disclosure.
And even DJ Durkin. Indirectly. So there's a lot of coaches that have had some issues, and but that was 10 or 11 years ago. He served his penance. He's coached at Louisville and in Missouri State since then with no issues. So
Western Kentucky.
Let's see how it works out. Yeah. So let's see how it works out.
Yeah, and he was at Western Kentucky briefly.
Was he? Okay. I probably should know that, but
yeah. But so again, people.
Nice
I
town,
think
Bowling Green,
it
Bowling
is.
Green, Kentucky. Nice
I
town.
was just up in Clarksville at the mother-in-law's. I spent a night there. It was a good month. No, it was fun. Went up there Saturday. But the funny thing is that people nowadays, because they have so much access to social media, sound bites, and whatever, they think that they know these coaches, and they don't. Now you do. You and Kirk Bowles,
As much as we can.
as much as you can. But the difference is and I tell this to every one of our young writers and guests that we have on the show, 25-year-old, because I've got kids that age, 23 to 34. And is that back, you and I know some of these coaches. You were around to spend a morning or an afternoon with a coach, have a few, ice cold hams beers with Sam Pittman or something like that. Back in the, when Ken Capps talks about Darryl Royal, you know what it's like to sit in the coach's office and say, tell me about your team this year and how special that is. And Kirk Bowles knows that. And Bo Carter knows that. We need to get back to that because it allows you to tell stories and say, I know this coach. I know him to be a good man. Now, I think it lends itself to fans speculating because they heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend, the old already, but that's where we got to get away from.
Well, but that starts with coaches. R.C. Slocum was as good a guy as you would know.
Oh,
Mac Browne. I covered Mac Browne when I was working with Kirk.
You did?
Austin. And Mac is just a genuinely nice guy, right?
Yes.
That cares about people.
Yeah.
So, and R.C. Slocum, there's never been a finer man, right? He's just a good person. So, he's made mistakes. Just nobody's perfect, but both those guys are good guys, and they would want to get to. They would allow you to get to know them on a more one-to-one basis. Coaches today don't allow that. In fact, sometimes, and I can, to some degree, I can see it because, and I don't like in today's media. You have a lot of guys that maybe don't follow the old-fashioned ethics of journalism. Mm-hmm. And so coaches become more guarded. So I understand it to a certain degree. And are you going to open your office for Kirk Bowles, but I'm not going to offer it to Olin Buchanan, right? Because Kirk, I feel like I know him, I can trust him, but Olin, that guy's a snake, I don't trust him at all. So
blasphemy.
Yes. So the best thing I can do is just not open it to anybody. And I'm gonna stay at arm's length from everybody, and then I'm going to keep my program that way, so I don't get to. So now reporters don't get to talk to the players, get to know the players. So from that standpoint, I think college sports has lost something because you root for Moose Muhammad if you're an A&M, and you love that he makes a one-handed catch for a touchdown against LSU. But beyond that, you realize you don't really know a whole lot about him because the way coaches operate now, they want to keep everybody so closed off that the very people that they want to buy tickets and to contribute and give to their program are actually more detached than they ever have been.
Yeah. Great description of what's going on. But as a kid growing up in Memphis, reading Bobby Hall, Mike Fleming, George Lapidus, Ron Higgins, love Ron Higgins. Dadgummit. When he went to St. Louis Catholic Church with us and always came to the men's club, beer and pizza. Any old business? Nope. Any new business? Nope. Meetings adjourned, bars open. Let's start drinking and eating pizza and talking college football. Ron had a son that walked on at Mississippi State, but he's back down in Baton Rouge now.
Yeah, Ron was a basketball player at Angelina Junior College in Lufkin, Texas. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that.
He was an Angelina Roadrunner.
I love it.
Next time you have Ron on your podcast, you ask him about those Angelina Roadrunners, what he thinks the outlook is.
I love it because I tell you, the first time I saw a Roadrunner, I was in Laguna Atascosa down around Harlingen and Laredo, Texas on the U.S.-Mexican border. Those are the coolest birds. They can't fly though; they can run. But
first
they
time
are
I
really
saw one, he had a coyote chasing him on TV.
That's right. That's right. From the Acme Oil Company.
Yes, sir.
There we go. All right. You know what? But see, I remember listening in the way that I based my show. Jeff Weinberger got me on the radio back in August of '88 to start. I would always call in. He goes, "Why don't you come in with me and start co-hosting?" And then I would listen to his show and be on there as a co-host and filling in. And George Lapidus in the '70s, late '70s, started it in Memphis. Great writer for the Press-Scimeter. And you just remember these stories about, I drove down to Tuscaloosa today and spent the afternoon with Coach Bryant in his office. And there's this story. You're like, wow, it is so cool to read that. And the Skywriters tours, Philip Marshall, Alf Van Hoos, Benny Marshall, Philip's dad. When Philip comes into a room, because I've always, and John Pruitt, his boss at the Huntsville Times, these great writers are like, I'll just say, if I was at the King Biscuit Blues Festival on Cherry Street in Helena, Arkansas, and I saw Robert Plant and Mick Jagger and Roger Daltrey, that's what it's like when I watch how y'all are treated when you and Kirk and Tony Barnhart and Scott Rabelais from the Baton Rouge Advocate, he'll be on the show with us Friday. He wears a coat and tie every day. And one of the guys said he, like Tony Barnhart, do that out of respect to the old time writers. And I had Scott on the show last week. Yeah, do what?
And I show up in shorts.
Well, that's okay.
Where if you're wearing socks, you're going formal.
Hey, look, I went to Auburn and I didn't wear socks, and they thought I was from a hillbilly. I said, no, that's the other side of the state. I'm from Memphis. It's just so hot I didn't wear socks. But anyway, I just watch how the great writers are treated. But again, it's like lawyers. My grandfather was an attorney and a judge, and these old lawyers are the greatest storytellers. They're like the great sports writers because you've put the time in. And Olin, you're young enough. We're both young enough. We can flip this narrative and get it back to where, and I think what's going to happen is the coaches are going to realize we can't keep pushing people away. The more money we make, I mean, we're becoming the snobs that we don't like.
Well, I think that's true. I don't know how much. First of all, I can't call the last time anyone said I was young enough for anything.
Shoot, you are. You're youthful. Yeah, you're youthful. You got a son in college.
Yeah, I do, at LSU of all things.
That's right.
Failed as
Go Tigers.
I failed as a parent, I don't see coaches getting less powerful.
Yeah.
And you know what? Like I said, I kind of understand where they're coming from, but I think it's sad that we're not always able to tell the stories. A couple of years ago, they actually let me have an interview. They granted me an interview with Buddy Johnson from who was played middle linebacker at A&M back in 2020. And in that interview, I learned that when he was in high school, he wanted to go out to a party on graduation night, and his mother wouldn't let him go. No, you're not. And he was all angry at her and everything. Well, the 4 kids that he was going to go with died in a car accident that night.
God.
And had he been I was able to tell that story. Nobody knew that story. And I was able to, go up and find the accident report of those poor kids that passed away. But and it really changed his relationship with his mother, right? And just the way he had approached life. And now, I think he's with the Bears now. But the point is that I was able to tell a story that he had never told before because they gave me access. And that's the kind of thing. Now, not every story is going to be dramatic like that, but you can find things, and I'm sure you've done this, that maybe somebody just didn't know about someone that you're rooting for. And then when they're in the stadium and you're rooting on Saturday and you see, pick out a player, Peyton Thorne, this week or this year, and somebody next to you says, did you read about how when he was 12 years old, he did this? And so, really, I didn't see that. Oh, yeah, it was in the whatever the Opelika papers call or whatever. Yeah, you should go back.
Opelika Auburn News.
Yeah, so whatever. So or it's in the Montgomery paper, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's something we all really miss.
Yeah, and you're right. And I can remember going to press conferences when I wrote for the Auburn Plainsman, and to have people like a David Housel and Buddy Davidson as your mentors, and by God, Jack Sims. I wasn't a journalism major. I started out in it, and Jack Sims was the head of the AP in the Olympics, and you could not misspell a word. And if you didn't indent 5 spaces to the right, I mean, you talk about drop and give me 20, but I'm glad I got that. And I remember the reverence, the respect in that press box at Jordan-Hare Stadium. You do not talk disparagingly about the other school that Auburn is playing. You are a host. It's an NCAA working press box. And you know the rule of no cheering.
No cheering.
It's the toughest thing to do. But it is so cool to be in the press. Buddy Martin said, you go in the press box at Auburn, there's pictures of all the Hall of Fame great writers all over the place. You go to Florida, nothing. And Florida's got a massive media contingent. What's the press box like at Kyle Field? And by the way, I would love you. Do you know R.C. Slocum? That's a man's man.
He's
Him and Coach Dye and Coach Stallings. No women and children around here, folks. That's that alpha male culture that we need more and more of in this society every day.
Well, the press box at Kyle Field, first of all, it's too high. It's about 9 stories up. Sports writers, we can all find a reason to complain about something, right?
Yeah.
And the food they serve is not very good. Only sports writers would complain about free food. But other than that, it's very spacious. Everything you need. Fortunately, there's air conditioning because by gosh, we sure need it. And then but the other thing we complain about is that the press box is on the east side of the stadium. Well, where does the sun set? Sun sets in the west.
Yeah.
So about 6, I think the first game against New Mexico is going to kick off at 6:30. So until about 8:45, we're going to have the sun right in our eyes. Mm-hmm. But once again, we watch ball games for a living. Who cares that we're complaining that hey, get some sunglasses, put on a visor.
Yeah. Well, you would think with 20,000 plus people studying engineering at Texas A&M that they would have, thought about that. But now what we're doing, we're moving the press boxes from the 50. Okay, there you go. They did it on purpose.
You moved it because it used to be on the other side, and when they renovated, they moved it there because they put in all the luxury boxes. So
exactly.
Those people don't have the sun in their eyes, and you know what? Yeah. I don't blame them. Yeah. Take care of the people that are actually paying to be in there, not the guys that are there just to write their opinions.
Yeah. But you know what? We just got a couple of minutes. I'll just say this. Sam Pittman was one of the coaches at SEC Media Days who said, first, let me say thank you to all of y'all in the media that are here. And there were several coaches that did that. It's never too late for us to turn this thing around. But I think the more people get to know these coaches, people can relate to Sam Pittman.
Here's what it'll take. It'll take a guy like Sam Pittman, which I don't want to go off my point, to start winning big. And he changes the way coaches think of it. Because right now, it's, Nick Saban's had so much success by saying, I'm the only voice. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be in control of everything. And so many people have followed that. Now, here's what I have to say about Sam Pittman. I detest that Sam Pittman is at Arkansas. Yeah. Because Sam Pittman is such an incredibly likable guy.
Yes.
That you can't root against him. And he's at Arkansas, and it's in your DNA, if you're an Aggie, to root against Arkansas.
I know.
But then you have this guy. It's like, how do I hate Sam Pittman? You can't hate Sam Pittman.
No.
We would like Chad Morris to go back to Arkansas.
Woo! I don't think they're going to go for that.
The Arkansas movement begins right here. And by the way, and Chad's an Aggie.
Oh yes, that's wild. All right,
Rob,
Olin.
Kirk Bowles and I are going to start we're starting a podcast. Kirk Bowles and I.
Are you serious?
Yeah, we're still working out. We're trying to hammer out the details right now, but we plan on having our own podcast starting this next month.
Wow.
Two old guys. Old and older. We're not dumb and dumber. We're old and older.
Hey, the wisdom, the knowledge that you two have will be, that's going to be must listen, must watch. Let us know about it as soon as you can on this show. Next time you're on here, next week, the week after, since you can be on, because we definitely want to be following you. Folks,
thank you so much.
You cannot put a value. You can't find a price tag big enough to put on experience and wisdom that y'all have. Let people know how they can follow you. And as always, Olin, thanks for taking time to join us this morning.
All right, thank you. And then, of course, I'm going to tell it the way I always do. Follow us on TexAgs.com. We feel like we are the preeminent outlet for all things Texas A&M sports. It's just an abbreviated version of Texas Aggies. It's TexAgs.com. You can follow us on Twitter at TexAgs, or you can follow me if you were so inclined. And I wish you would on Twitter. It's just my name, or I guess it's called X now. It's just my name. If you can figure out how to spell it, you can follow me, and there it is right there on the Rob Browne podcast. So
that's right.
There's the name. You follow me, and I'd appreciate it.
Hey, we will. Olin Buchanan, TexAgs.com. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.
You too, Rob.
All right, thanks. All right, let's say Jordan Hill is going to be on with us right now, and Jordan Hill covers the Dogs down there in Threepeatville, Athens, Georgia, the Classic City. Let me say something about one of our sponsors, RumbleBoxingGym.com. Awesome. 1835 Union Avenue, Midtown Memphis, right at the corner of Union and McLean, across from Walgreens. There's plenty of parking every day, 7 days a week. Great workouts. Boxing. They're 15 3-minute rounds, 45-minute workouts. You're doing calisthenics, dumbbell work, jumping jacks, star jacks, burpees, dips, planks. Then you're doing the punching bags, 250-pound bags. I mean, you are jabbing, hooking, punching. You have instructors that really know what they're doing. RumbleBoxingGym.com. Check them out on our website, www.sidelines.live. This is the first of 3 locations that Ann Camp is going to open in the Memphis area. Again, 1835 Union Avenue. Proud to be associated with them, RumbleBoxingGym.com. No excitement, I guess, right now as the Dogs are teeing it up, getting ready to try to go for that three-peat. We referenced it earlier. I'm sure you've heard a lot about it, and the Georgia players are too. 36, 37, 38. The Minnesota, the Gophers went for the three-peat back then. That's right when the AP poll started. But is it a case of, it's more the fans talking about it, and the players are going, look, I don't care who our schedule is. Everybody we play, they have a job, and that's to beat us. And if we're not ready, forget about three-peating.
Definitely, and I think my favorite interaction from SEC Media Days, I was reading through the transcript afterwards, and Brock Bowers was asked, hey, do you know the last team that won 3 in a row? And he says, Minnesota. And then someone says, how long have you known that? He said, about 10 minutes ago, whoever else had brought it up to him. I mean,
yeah,
I get they don't care, and they don't need to care. One, because none of us were alive when that happened. But two, something that Kirby and really all these players have harped on for a long time is what's in the past is in the past. I mean, they had so many guys on these last few teams that are playing on Sundays now, that weren't responsible for whatever happens in 2023. Those guys have moved on. Guys like Stetson Bennett, Keely Ringo, Chris Smith. I mean, all those guys are going to be in the NFL next year. So they've always said the right things when it comes to, just getting ready for another season. They did it last year. I mean, they knew how to handle the moment, especially in front of cameras. And I don't think they get caught up in that because they know there's a lot of competition on this roster, and they know that they've got to fight just to get playing time when you got so many 4-stars and 5-stars around you.
Well, I watched an interview on Marty and McGee, Brock Bowers from SEC Media Days, and he just talked about the value and what he learned going up against 25 guys in the last 2 years taken in the NFL draft, not to mention all the free agents that are playing in the NFL. And he comes from Napa, California. And he talked about, he gets there, and Kirby Smart is a little bit different than the guy that when he was in your living room recruiting you, but he's toughened up a lot. Have you ever seen a tight end who is like, maybe is he a a little bit shorter than Rob Gronkowski, who played at Arizona, had about 9,000 yards receiving before he became a full-time commercial spokesman. But this Brock Bowers, I've never seen anybody like him who is that athletic at tight end who could play receiver or running back as well. Peyton Hillis at Arkansas comes to mind.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny, the first time I got to interview Brock, I'd been at Auburn, came over to Georgia. He had already been, that was going into his sophomore year. And the first time we interviewed him, I was standing there, I was like, this guy isn't as big, as I had in my head from just watching games. And he talked about that at media days. Was like, I get a lot of, you're not as big as I thought you'd be, like when he's out downtown in Athens and stuff like that. But I mean, I think that's to his advantage because he's still able to move at his size. He's not a little guy by any means. And, it was really interesting. We got to talk to Todd Hartley, who is Brock's position coach. We talked to him yesterday, and, he said he's the hardest working kid I've ever seen. He said, he's so competitive. He said he gets ticked when he gets pulled out of reps. The tight ends coach is like, look, I got to see these younger guys. I got to see Oscar Delp. I got to see Lawson Lucky and Pierce Sperlin. He gets pulled out and he's looking at Todd Hartley like, what I do wrong? And he's like, Todd said, he's like, hey, buddy, it's okay. Just stand over here and watch a couple reps. It'll be okay. I mean, that guy's just driven. And I'm, you don't want to wish away this next season, but I think about when he gets into the NFL and going through that draft. I mean, I think he could go really, really high, especially for a tight end, just because of the skill set and also his work ethic. I mean, wherever he lands in the NFL, he's going to be a playmaker, and he's fun to watch. And I think going back to your first point, Rob, he's the kind of guy that this Georgia team needs in chasing another championship, because he's not a guy that's going to be like, hey, we can, we're going to practice today, but I'm going to kind of go halfway. I'm not going to go that hard. He's a guy that's racing to win every rep. And they talk about when they're racing each other, that he's at the front of the line. He wants to win every rep. That's the kind of guy you need, especially in a program where it would be very easy for things to get stagnant because of their success. Guys like Brock Bowers make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, complacency is the root of all evil. I mean, that's what gets into a program and will take you out. And one thing, this is hard to believe, but it's year number 8 for Kirby Smart at Georgia. And that first year they went 8-5, went to the Liberty Bowl. And since then, the next year they played for the national championship and lost on that play. We all know, 3rd and 43 or whatever. But look, this Georgia, it is a program, absolute program. Let's talk about Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp, that co-defensive coordinator relationship. It works really well. And then from that, I want you to talk about what it's going to be like having Mike Bobo, who was there for the first 14 years of the Mark Richt era, left for Colorado State, and things changed for Georgia when he left. He gets maligned way too often. He's got a hell of a track record, in my opinion.
Definitely. And starting with the defensive side, I mean, I think you've got a good blend of youth and experience in Glenn Schumann, who I think now is only 32. I mean, he's been there. Kirby Smart, and Dell McGee have all been there since day one when Kirby was hired, has been there for all 7 seasons to this point, getting ready for the 8th season. But yeah, I mean, Glenn was credited for being the defensive play caller, but you think about having a guy like Will Muschamp, a guy that's in there that's having those conversations, and Kirby as well. Glenn has got a very bright future, whether he stays put at Georgia or goes elsewhere. Yeah. Philadelphia Eagles were after him hard this offseason. He talked about that yesterday, just saying, that it was a privilege to have that opportunity to interview for that job. He talked really highly about quality of life at Georgia and, made it sound like he's not in a rush to leave. Now, if he gets the right opportunity, I'm sure he will. And then with Mike Bobo, I mean, everything to this point has been positive from what we've heard from players and Kirby Smart as well. I don't expect a whole lot of different changes from what we've seen in the past. That was something that Kirby talked about going back to the spring, saying that, we're not changing the terminology to what Mike does. It's sort of more of what Georgia does, and said that, there was things that Todd Monken had to adjust to that have been in place. And a thing that's going to really help Mike is that he's coached with Brian McClendon before. He's coached with Todd Hartley before. He's coached with Stacy Searles before. He sort
Yeah.
of knows what he's getting into. He had that year last year as an analyst, and was able to get to know the personnel a little bit better, get to know what the state of the program really is. And to your point, Rob, he does get a lot of criticism, and I always make sure to point out that what still stands as the top scoring offense in Georgia program history was his last one in 2014. As much success as they had with Stetson Bennett, with Todd Monken calling the plays, they never hit that points per game average that Mike's last offense had. I think it's going to go really well. It may look a little different, but I'm not expecting drastic changes, and I think this offense will be in good shape once we get into the season.
Yeah, and let's talk now about the quarterbacks. Stetson Bennett, he's gone. And I don't know how he's doing in training camp, but he's going to make somebody's team. But you've got Carson Beck, Brock Vandegrift, and most people are saying it's going to be Carson Beck. We saw him play a little bit last year. I think he's out of Jacksonville, came in as a 4-star, maybe a 5-star on some list. But anybody else in that quarterback room that you think could make a giant, one small step for man, one giant leap for Georgia?
Well, I think it will be Carson Beck that'll be the starter, and I think Brock will be his backup, Brock Vandegrift. And I mean, the guy I kind of want to learn more about is just Gunnar Stockton, who's that third and final scholarship quarterback, and just to see what kind of growth he makes. And that's sort of more looking to the long term of Georgia, because they've got Dylan Raiola committed. And, the belief is, well, he's going to come in as a true freshman and start, and it's possible.
Yeah.
But you can't write off, there's still the possibility, let's say Carson wins the job. He could go pro after this year, or he could decide to come back another year, and, you'd have to look that way as far as him coming back and starting. But Gunnar is a guy that's got a lot of promise, has gotten a lot of hype going into this year. Not so much that I think he's going to challenge Carson to start this fall, but I think he's in good shape. And what helps is he has got a connection with Mike Bobo going back to win. I think their families are quite familiar, and the belief was that he was going to follow Mike wherever he went. He committed to Mike when Mike was still at South Carolina. Bobo goes to Auburn, and the belief at the time was, okay, that probably means Gunnar's going to Auburn. He picks Georgia instead, and lo and behold, they wind up still getting to work together with Mike coming back to Georgia. But I want to see how Gunnar handles these practices and what he's able to do, what kind of momentum he can get for the future. Because everybody seems to have written in, okay, Dylan Raiola is going to come in as a 5-star number 1 player in the country and immediately start. It's not going to be that easy. And if we hear a lot of good things about Gunnar, you'd have to look at him and say, he's going to be the challenger. He's going to be the guy, especially with experience and sort of the institutional knowledge he'll bring, will be the guy that could be the starter in 2024.
Yeah, and you talk about Dylan Raiola has transferred in, third school in 4 years. He's at Buford. Were you surprised Saturday night when 5-star safety KJ Bolden announced for now, because apparently he's going to take official visits, like, I'm engaged, we're going to get married, but I'm going to date other people until we get married. I mean, unless they shut it down, are they really committed? And does Georgia have an opportunity, you think, with Raiola, his teammate there in Buford, where they've spent, about $50 million recently to upgrade their facilities there? Just another Metro Atlanta superpower program there in the 22 counties that make up the greater Atlanta.
Well, Georgia fans probably aren't going to like me saying this, but I do think KJ Bolden's going to go to Florida State. And it's kind of funny when you looked at that commitment. It seemed like Auburn had gotten some momentum late. He had met with Hugh Freeze late. And on one side, if you're a Georgia fan, I think you go, well, at least he's not going to Auburn. At least he's, we're not going to have to play him other than if, we have a bowl game or something. But I think that his FSU commitment is more secure than I would say had he committed to Auburn. Had he committed to Auburn, I would say, I think this thing's still wide open. But he has said in the past, even leading up to his announcement on Saturday night, that Florida State was his dream school. I think they were one of the first schools to offer him. That happening, I don't think that Georgia's going to totally, they're done talking to him. I think they are still going to recruit him. But the fact he committed to Florida State, the connection he's got with Mike Norvell, and again, calling it his dream school, being a school he always wanted to go to, that makes me feel more confident that he sticks with that commitment. Hey, we know in this, Rob, when it comes to recruitment, you never say never. You wait till December and see who signs and see who doesn't sign. But I do think he'll wind up at Florida State, and it's one of those things now that safety all of a sudden is a very interesting position for Georgia in 2024. Having him choose Florida State, having Peyton Woodyard, he flipped his commitment from Georgia to Alabama. Jalen Hayward's a guy who had decommitted a few weeks ago, just committed to UCF. It's a very interesting position Georgia's in at safety. They got a few options still on the board. It will be interesting to see if they go out and try to add to this class, or if they look at the depth they got at the position right now and say, okay, as far as a 24 class, we can manage getting through it with what we got.
Yeah. And you think about, in the case of Auburn, with their success here in recruiting, that NIL collective, that's what it feeds off of. People are going, okay, they flipped DeMarcus Riddick. They flipped Perry Thompson. They got real close with KJ Bolden. But then they got Lewis out of Ellijay, Schley County, whose brother, Zykevius, is already on the team at Auburn. People forget that. But I think, it's interesting watching in recruiting, but these collectives, again, let's be honest, completely transparent. There's always been a little bit of malfeasance going on in the background in recruiting over the years. I've heard stories, but anyway, it's Auburn. You talked about a friend of yours who's on the staff covering Georgia now. He'd been in Auburn the last few years. And I said, God, he's probably got amnesia. How do I cover recruiting? Because they didn't do it for about 3 years, but now they are. But I look at Georgia. They lose a guy like KJ Bolden. They're going to go find somebody else. I think of Keely Ringo out of Scottsdale. I think of, Harold Washington out of Las Vegas. Darnell Washington, not Harold, weird Harold. But I think of Brock Bowers, Napa, California. No, those are hotbeds of Georgia football fans, aren't they? I mean, that's where that program is now. And but there's still a culture at Georgia. And the state of Georgia is the fourth most talent-rich state in America for high school football. About 250 Division I players a year coming out of that state. Of the top 15 players, how many does Georgia see or do they list as priority recruits?
Well, I think that's sort of the funny thing coming out of this, and especially with KJ Bolden. You look at, if you looked at the Junkyard, our message board on Saturday night, not a lot of people very, very thrilled, and I understand why. But I sort of explained this on one of the threads, that Georgia obviously wants to keep those guys like KJ Bolden home. But they're at the point where they can do, like you just said, Rob, go out to California and get a Brock Bowers, go out to Las Vegas and get a Darnell Washington. I mean, you look at Dylan Raiola, who we were just talking about, coming out from Arizona, getting a guy like that. I mean, they gotten guys in this class from Texas and New Jersey and Illinois. I mean, they've gone all over the map. So as far as what's left on the board in 2024, there's a few guys, but really none of them are in the state of Georgia off the top of my head. I mean, you've got Williams Nwaneri is probably the biggest guy still on the board, a defensive lineman from Missouri. And then Chris Cole's another guy, a linebacker, but he's from Virginia. So I think that they do a good job of sort of balancing, hey, we're going to recruit in the state of Georgia. And yeah, they've had some swings and misses, and that's just sort of part of it, especially when you're talking about around the Atlanta area. I mean, everybody goes in there to get talent. Yeah. But they're at the point where they can recruit nationally, and they've done a very good job of that. And it's funny with all the panicking and all the questions, which some are legitimate, we're still talking about the number one recruiting class in the country.
Exactly. And you think about it's not like Georgia hadn't done it before. Let's go back a few years ago to DeAndre Swift out of St. Joseph's Prep, Philadelphia. You think of Noshawn Marino from Exit 96 and somewhere in New Jersey. They've always had a knack for getting kids. Now, also maybe they have a relative in Atlanta or somewhere in Georgia. but they've done a great job of that. Tennessee really go back 40 plus years ago. Johnny Majors was there. They really started recruiting nationally like nobody else in the SEC. And again, you don't really have to recruit nationally when you're Georgia, because if Georgia wants an in-state kid and the kid is a Georgia fan, it is almost impossible to get the kid away. 48% of the time historically, when a blue chip stud athlete in Georgia, if he doesn't sign with the Dogs, he's going to Auburn or Clemson. It's just the way it is. Is Georgia Tech, I mean, I'm not sure, and I hope Brett Key can do a better job, but is that rivalry with Georgia, is Georgia going to keep playing Georgia? I mean, what's going on there? The ACC right now, they got to have leadership, or that conference is going to go the way of the Pac-12.
Yeah, I mean, I think that rivalry will continue. You know, we didn't see it in 2020 because of COVID, but I think it's one that we'll see continue. And I got to give a lot of credit to Tech last year. That first half was really competitive. And think about it, that was the end of the season. They'd already fired Jeff Collins. I mean, they could have packed it in. And I think it'll continue. And I think that in time, if they give Brent Key time and resources, I do think he'll do a good job. Coached Alabama, has done a good job while he was an assistant at Tech. And I always caution people, you know, we talked about Auburn, Georgia earlier this year, and, you know, oh, well, Georgia's dominating this thing. It always comes in cycles. And I don't see a window where all of a sudden, you know, Georgia's losing to Tech every single year, but it'll get more competitive. It's just more of, can Georgia Tech find sort of its niche, which I do think it had with Paul Johnson. And you saw they beat Georgia a few times along the way. Brent Key's just going to have to figure out what that is. And I think, you know, just for the sake of college football, being a college football fan, I always think those are the type of rivalries you want to see competitive. They make the sport more fun. Georgia fans probably don't like that. They'd rather just see them, you know, beat them 90-0. But I think in time it could become a more competitive rivalry again.
Yeah, and whether we want to admit it or not, nobody would cover a rivalry if it was completely one-sided. I mean, you know, as great as things are for Georgia right now, add up the Spurrier years, 1-11 against the Gators, the Urban Meyer years. I mean, even the Ron Zook years. That period, 12 plus 3, 15 plus 6 over Urban Meyer, 21. Georgia was 3-18 in that 21-year period against Florida. Yet that rivalry is as fierce of rivalries you'll find anywhere in college football. So, man, that part right there, it's interesting. And I'm in Atlanta a lot, and you drive right by Georgia Tech Stadium, and it's right across from walk the bridge to the varsity, where you can go get those, you know, greasy hamburgers with pimento cheese on them and a bowl of chili and some French fried potatoes. And boy, that's the old health plate, you might want to call it. But all right, we're about out of time. I got to say this, man. Your description of what's going on at Georgia, it's obvious they're not letting up. Kirby Smart is so. I mean, where did he learn it from? His father. Don't forget, great coach down in Bainbridge, Georgia. Is his father still living?
Yes, he is.
Okay. I think that would be a cool story. Have you gone down there and never talked to his dad about Kirby as a kid?
No, there have been several stories written about it, but no, I haven't had a chance to talk to Sonny.
Only Jordan, but Jordan Hill, you're a damn good writer. And you've got, you know, are you even, you know, you've been doing this for what, 8 years, 9 years?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. And you're the one that gave that great description of Georgia. North Georgia, for a lot of people, it's that Tennessee rivalry. Northeast Georgia, South Carolina or Clemson. South Georgia, maybe Florida for sure. West Georgia, Auburn. And, you know, Georgia, bottom line, they're the tip of the spear for college football. Let me know that. Let me say this. Most often we see the face of Christ in the least among us. We live in the greatest country in the history of the world. The First Amendment gives us the right of free speech. We get the best guests anywhere. Jordan, let people know how they can follow you and maybe some stories that you've got in the can that you are about to release so they can keep up with you, because you work 24/7 for Georgia.
Definitely. The website is named 24/7 for a reason. But yeah, dogs247.com, on Twitter at Jordan Davis Hill, on Twitter at dogs247. And yeah, going through fall camp, got some stories about Brock Bowers that are out, Todd Hartley, who we mentioned earlier. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk to Del McGee, the running backs coach, along with Mike Bobo. So there will be some stories about that. So got that going and getting ready for what's left of this fall camp and continuing the countdown until we get to September 2nd.
Oh yeah. I mean, it is going to be here before we know it. But anyway, great stuff. Great show. We got another one stacked lineup for tomorrow. Thanks for all of our listeners, our sponsors, viewers, and everybody. Until tomorrow, have a great one. We are out of here. Take care, Francis. Okay.